What if I told you there's a company that has investments in Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Nvidia, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, and thousands of other businesses, all at the same time? It sounds almost impossible. Some people even claim this company secretly owns America. Others believe it controls the stock market, influences the global economy, and quietly pulls the strings behind the world's biggest corporations. On social media, you'll find countless videos calling it the most powerful company you've never heard of. That company is BlackRock. Today, BlackRock manages trillions of dollars in assets, making it the largest asset manager in the world. At first glance, its name appears on shareholder lists of many of the biggest companies on Earth. If you look up Apple, Microsoft, Meta, or Amazon, chances are you'll see BlackRock listed among their largest shareholders. So it's easy to ask the question, does BlackRock actually own these companies? And if it does, how did one company become so powerful? The truth is both simpler and far more fascinating than the internet makes it sound. BlackRock isn't a secret government. It isn't a hidden corporation buying up the world for itself. In fact, one of the biggest misconceptions about BlackRock is the very thing that made it famous online. Most people confuse managing money with owning money. Those are two completely different things. Imagine you hire someone to manage your house while you're away. They take care of it, collect rent, and handle maintenance. They manage the property, but they don't suddenly become the owner. BlackRock works in a surprisingly similar way. It manages money for millions of clients, but that doesn't automatically mean the money belongs to BlackRock itself. And once you understand that difference, you'll begin to see why this company became one of the most influential financial institutions in history, without most people ever noticing. To understand BlackRock, you first need to understand what an asset manager actually does. Imagine thousands of people want to invest for retirement, their children's education, or simply grow their savings over time. Most of them don't have the time to research hundreds of companies or constantly monitor the stock market. Instead, they hand their money to professional investment firms whose job is to invest it on their behalf. That's exactly where BlackRock comes in. BlackRock doesn't operate like a traditional bank that lends money, and it isn't a hedge fund making risky bets with its own fortune. Instead, it manages investments for a huge range of clients, including pension funds, retirement accounts, insurance companies, governments, universities, charities, and millions of everyday investors. In other words, much of the money BlackRock manages belongs to teachers, firefighters, engineers, doctors, office workers, and people saving for retirement, not to BlackRock itself. Think of it like a massive fleet of buses. The passengers own their luggage, while the driver simply gets everyone safely to their destination. BlackRock is the driver. The investments belong to the clients. One of BlackRock's biggest products is its iShares family of exchange-traded funds, better known as ETFs. Imagine you want to invest in the 500 largest companies in America. Buying all 500 stocks individually would be expensive and complicated. Instead, you can buy a single ETF that already holds shares in all those companies. It's simple, diversified, and one of the reasons ETFs have become so popular around the world. Because millions of investors put their money into these funds, BlackRock ends up purchasing shares in thousands of companies. That's why its name appears on shareholder lists almost everywhere you look. But here's the crucial point. Seeing BlackRock listed as a shareholder doesn't mean BlackRock personally owns those companies. In most cases, it is holding those shares on behalf of millions of investors whose money is invested through its funds. Understanding that difference changes the entire story, and in the next part you'll see why so many people still believe BlackRock owns everything. So why do so many people believe BlackRock owns America? The answer starts with a simple internet search. Open the shareholder page for companies like Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Coca-Cola, or McDonald's, and you'll often see BlackRock listed among the largest shareholders. At first glance, that looks shocking. The same name keeps appearing over and over again. It's easy to assume one company is quietly buying everything. But what those lists don't immediately explain is who the money behind those shares actually belongs to. Imagine a giant apartment building with 10,000 residents. A professional property management company takes care of the building, collects maintenance fees, organizes repairs, and keeps everything running smoothly. If someone looked only at the management records, they might think the management company owns the entire building. In reality, each apartment belongs to a different owner. The management company simply represents them. That's very similar to how BlackRock appears on shareholder records. When BlackRock buys shares through one of its investment funds, it's acting on behalf of millions of investors whose money is pooled together. Those investors may include someone's retirement account, a teacher's pension fund, a university endowment, or even an ordinary person investing a few $100s every month through an ETF. Because all of that money is managed under BlackRock's name, the company often appears as the registered shareholder, even though the economic ownership is spread across countless individual investors. This is also why you'll frequently see BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street appearing together among the largest shareholders of many major companies. These firms all manage enormous index funds that invest in the same broad stock market. They're not secretly competing to buy entire companies. They're managing investments that track the market itself. That doesn't mean BlackRock has no influence. As one of the world's largest asset managers, it does have voting rights attached to many of the shares it manages, giving it a voice in certain corporate decisions. But having influence is not the same as owning everything. And that distinction is where the real story begins, because the next question is even more fascinating. How did BlackRock become so enormous in the first place? BlackRock didn't become the world's largest asset manager overnight. It started in 1988, when Larry Fink and a small team of finance professionals founded the company with a different idea. Instead of chasing quick profits, they wanted to help investors better understand and manage risk. That focus on risk management became BlackRock's biggest advantage. As the years passed, more pension funds, governments, insurance companies, and large institutions trusted BlackRock to manage their investments. But one event changed everything: the 2008 global financial crisis. While banks around the world were struggling, governments and financial institutions turned to BlackRock for help analyzing complex financial assets. Its expertise during one of the biggest financial crises in history significantly strengthened its reputation. Then came another game-changing move. In 2009, BlackRock acquired Barclays Global Investors, including the popular iShares ETF business. This acquisition instantly made BlackRock the global leader in exchange-traded funds. Suddenly, millions of everyday investors buying simple index funds were indirectly investing through BlackRock's platform. Imagine a small grocery store suddenly buying the largest supermarket chain in the country. Overnight, its customer base, products, and market presence would multiply. That's essentially what happened to BlackRock. The acquisition dramatically expanded the amount of money it managed and accelerated its global growth. Today, BlackRock serves clients in more than 100 countries, managing investments across stocks, bonds, real estate, infrastructure, and many other asset classes. It didn't become powerful by selling a revolutionary product to consumers. It became powerful because millions of investors, from individuals saving for retirement to the world's largest institutions, trusted it to manage their money. And that trust transformed BlackRock into a financial giant unlike almost any other. One question still remains. If BlackRock doesn't actually own all these companies, why does its opinion matter so much? The answer lies in something called shareholder voting. When a company is publicly traded, shareholders can vote on important issues. These include electing board members, approving executive compensation, and deciding on certain major corporate proposals. Since BlackRock manages large investment funds that hold shares in thousands of companies, it often has the right to vote those shares on behalf of its clients. Imagine a school election where one student is trusted to submit votes for thousands of classmates. That student doesn't own the school, but their vote carries significant weight because they're representing many people. BlackRock works in a similar way. Its voting power comes from the enormous number of shares managed across its investment funds, not because it personally owns those businesses. This influence has made BlackRock a major voice in corporate governance. When the company supports or opposes certain proposals, business leaders often pay close attention. However, it's important to understand that BlackRock doesn't make every decision alone. Other large investment firms, institutional investors, and millions of individual shareholders also vote, and corporate boards remain responsible for running their companies. So while BlackRock has considerable influence in boardrooms around the world, Influence should never be confused with control. Managing investments gives the company a powerful seat at the table, but it doesn't mean BlackRock secretly runs every company it invests in. And that's where the biggest misconception begins. Another reason BlackRock seems so powerful is because its investments are spread across almost every major industry. Whether it's technology, healthcare, banking, energy, consumer products, or manufacturing, chances are there's an investment fund managed by BlackRock that holds shares in companies within that sector. This creates the impression that BlackRock owns the entire economy. In reality, it's a reflection of how index investing works. Think about the S&P 500, one of the world's most popular stock market indexes. It tracks around 500 of the largest publicly traded companies in the United States. If millions of people invest in an S&P 500 ETF managed by BlackRock, the fund has to buy shares in nearly all of those companies. It isn't choosing favorites. It's simply following the index. Imagine baking a fruitcake using a recipe. If the recipe calls for apples, bananas, oranges, and grapes, you don't get to leave one out. You follow the recipe exactly. Index funds work the same way. If a company is part of the index, the fund buys it in the correct proportion. This is why BlackRock appears as a shareholder in companies that compete with one another, such as different airlines, banks, or technology firms. It isn't trying to control both sides of the competition. It's following investment strategies designed to mirror the market for millions of investors. Ironically, the very strategy that made investing simpler and cheaper for everyday people is also what created the myth that one company quietly owns everything. In the next part, we'll answer the biggest question of all. Is BlackRock actually as powerful as people believe, or is its influence often exaggerated? So, does BlackRock really have enormous influence? Yes. Does it secretly control America or every company it invests in? No. Those are two very different ideas. BlackRock is influential because of its size. When you're responsible for managing trillions of dollars for clients around the world, business leaders naturally pay attention to your views. But influence doesn't mean absolute control. Every publicly traded company has its own board of directors, executive team, regulations, and millions of shareholders whose interests must also be considered. Think about the coach of a professional sports team. The coach makes important decisions and has a major influence on the team's performance. But the coach doesn't own the stadium, the league, or every player. In the same way, BlackRock plays an important role in global finance, but it doesn't own or directly control the entire economy. Another common misconception comes from social media, where complicated financial systems are often simplified into dramatic headlines. Saying one company owns everything is far more attention-grabbing than explaining how asset management, index funds, and shareholder voting actually work. But reality is usually more complex than a viral headline. That's not to say BlackRock escapes criticism. Some people believe large asset managers have too much influence over corporate decisions, while others argue they're simply doing the job investors hired them to do. It's an ongoing debate among economists, investors, regulators, and policymakers. The real story isn't that BlackRock secretly owns America. The real story is that it helped transform the way millions of people invest, becoming one of the most influential financial institutions in the world. Not by owning everyone's money, but by managing it on their behalf. If BlackRock doesn't own the companies it invests in, then who actually owns them? The answer is surprisingly simple: millions of investors. Every time someone contributes to a retirement account, buys an ETF, invests through a pension plan, or purchases mutual fund shares, they become part of the ownership behind those investments. BlackRock's role is to manage those assets, not to personally own them. Imagine 10 million people each put money into the same investment fund. The fund then buys shares in companies like Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and Coca-Cola. On public records, BlackRock may appear as the shareholder because it manages the fund. But the economic value belongs to the millions of people whose money is invested. If the value of those investments rises, the investors benefit. If it falls, they bear the loss. BlackRock earns management fees for overseeing the investments, regardless of who the individual investors are. This business model has transformed investing. Decades ago, building a diversified portfolio required significant knowledge, time, and money. Today, someone can invest in hundreds of companies with a single ETF purchase, often with relatively low fees. That's one of the biggest reasons index investing has become so popular around the world. So while BlackRock has become one of the largest asset managers in history, its success ultimately depends on the trust of millions of investors who choose to place their money in its funds. And that's what makes the final question so important. What does BlackRock's rise tell us about the future of investing? And why should ordinary people care? So why should someone who isn't a billionaire, a CEO, or a Wall Street investor care about BlackRock? Because there's a good chance you're already connected to it without realizing it. If you have a retirement account, a pension, an ETF, or a mutual fund, your savings may already be invested through funds managed by BlackRock or another major asset manager. Whether you're saving for your first home, your children's education, or retirement decades from now, companies like BlackRock help move that money into investments designed for long-term growth. This is why BlackRock's decisions often make financial news. When markets become volatile, interest rates change, or the global economy shifts, the company publishes research and market outlooks that many institutional investors follow. But it's important to remember that BlackRock doesn't control the market. It responds to the same economic forces as everyone else. Inflation, central bank decisions, corporate earnings, technological innovation, and geopolitical events influence investment performance far more than any single asset manager. The bigger lesson isn't about one company becoming powerful. It's about how modern investing has changed. Instead of millions of people individually picking stocks, a growing number choose low-cost index funds that automatically invest across hundreds of companies. That simple shift has helped firms like BlackRock grow into global financial giants. And understanding that system is far more valuable than believing viral headlines that claim one company secretly owns the world. So, does BlackRock quietly own America? Not in the way many people believe. It doesn't own the money it manages, it doesn't secretly control every company it invests in, and it doesn't make every decision in the corporate world. What it does have is something just as remarkable: trust. Millions of people and institutions have chosen to let BlackRock manage their investments, and that trust has turned it into the largest asset manager on the planet. The internet often prefers simple answers to complex questions. Saying one company owns everything is a powerful headline, but the truth is far more interesting. BlackRock became a financial giant by building investment products that millions of ordinary people use every day. Every retirement contribution, every pension investment, and every ETF purchase helped fuel its growth. Not because BlackRock was buying the world for itself, but because it was managing the world's savings. In many ways, BlackRock reflects how modern finance has evolved. Instead of individual investors trying to beat the market one stock at a time, millions now invest through diversified funds that own small pieces of hundreds or even thousands of companies. That's why BlackRock's name appears almost everywhere. Not because it secretly owns the economy, but because it helps manage investments across it. And perhaps that's the biggest lesson of all. The most powerful companies aren't always the ones selling products you use every day. Sometimes they're the companies working quietly in the background, moving money, managing investments, and shaping the financial system without most people ever noticing. So the next time someone says, BlackRock owns America, you'll know the real story. It doesn't own America, but it has become one of the most influential financial institutions in the world by managing the investments of millions of people. And understanding that difference changes everything.